excited to be here in the USF Botanical Gardens with Dr. Sara Dykins Callahan. She received an Office of Community Engagement and Partnerships grant from our office, and it's been able to help her facilitate her course that she'd been teaching all along, but now it's maybe going to pick up speed and be offered more. So can you tell us a little bit about your course and some of the changes?
Definitely. The course is currently titled Ethics of Food Production, but it's going to become Introduction to Food Studies, in part because of the assistance of the grant that I received from you all, so that was great. The grant really helped us establish some infrastructure actually that we had been lacking. A great deal of the monies previously were coming out of my pocket, which was very difficult and not sustainable at all. And so partnering with you guys really helped in terms of providing some of the larger materials that we needed in order to keep the course going.
A lot of times faculty want to know what they could use the grant for, so can you give some examples of the kinds of materials you were able to purchase and some of the things you were able to do?
Sure, definitely. Well, surprisingly, you're able to buy quite a few different kinds of materials. I was able to buy a light stand as well as grow lights, and grow lights are used to start seedlings inside because oftentimes I'll have to start them over winter break, and there's just not enough sunlight or warmth outside to have the seedlings growing appropriately. So these grow lights are very expensive, and so the grant was able to provide the means for us to purchase a couple of grow lights. So from now on, I'll be able to start seedlings inside and not have to worry about the weather conditions.
And what were some of the other changes you made in order to make it, it's always been service learning, but you kind of formalized that this year?
Yeah, sure. So it hadn't occurred to me, honestly, that the things that we do could be considered service learning. For the past 5 years, we've partnered with the Botanical Gardens, but I hadn't actually thought about the things we were doing as service learning components. But someone brought it to my attention recently that the course very well could be considered a service learning course, especially if I formalize some of the components, like the activity that would assist the Botanical Gardens with their large spring festival and have my students actually participate physically in facilitating the festival itself. So that's one of the things. And then the other thing is that the vegetable gardens that we've been growing all along, they contribute to the Botanical Garden's ability to demonstrate its relevancy and usefulness to the academic components of the university. And so that's a great help to them as well. Something that I hadn't considered as being a service learning element.
Well, I think that's really fantastic. I do know that the Botanical Gardens does not receive funding from USF, and yet it provides so much to us here on the campus. So can you talk a little bit more about some of the goals of the Botanical Gardens and how you've been able to kind of help with that?
Sure. The Botanical Gardens, the Botanical Gardens, ultimately their goal is outreach, not only to the community, but also to students who are on campus as well as staff and faculty. They have a limited amount of support financially from external sources. They have to generate their own funding, and they do that through festivals like the Spring Festival that my students assisted with. And it's through those festivals and through PR elements that my students were creating for them this semester as well, that they can advertise and solicit more support and funding to help them maintain their commitments to academics as well as to this beautiful space and to allowing the community to come here and learn and interact.
This is fantastic because I often have people wanting to know, what do these grants do? And so I think it's really great for you to give us some of the specifics so that more faculty can come to us and we can continue to do this kind of programming. So I would love to learn more about the specifics of your course and what goes into the ethics of food production. We recently had our Sustainable Food Conference where you presented, and I think that we realized how important the issue of food really is to everyone. And we talk a lot about poverty, but it's hard for us to get into the topic sometimes, but being able to approach it through food, I think has been really a great way for us to capture the attention of so many more people. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the course itself and what are some of the issues that you see surrounding food.
Okay, sure. Well, it's somewhat of a survey course, and we do focus on the United States primarily as our jumping off point. we later in the semester will talk about global issues, but it's really good for students to be able to connect with and find something relevant in the materials up front. And so I really try to focus on their lives at first and how the food system impacts their lives. And so the course really focuses on the issues that are facing our current food system. So we do begin the course with the premise that there is something wrong with our current food system. And we explore together what some of those issues look like. We focus originally on the body of the consumer. So understanding consumers as not only people who go out and purchase products, but also as people who literally consume foods to survive. And so thinking about how our current food system poses problems for humans as consumers. And so students, of course, are very interested in health issues, diabetes, cardiovascular issues, obesity. So these are some of the issues that we talk about initially to get students interested and invested in the topic. And then we move to questions of labor, right? And who produces our food and how those systems perpetuate some inequity
absolutely.
in our society.
Right.
And so we examine some of our local producers and some of the issues that they find relevant. For instance, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers.
Yes.
Right. And we end the course dealing with one of the probably most controversial elements and one of the ones that students get a little bit nervous about dealing with, and that's the bodies of the consumed. Both plant bodies, the environments that produce the plants that we consume, the oceans, and the actual living creatures. Right? And so we examine how our current food system treats those bodies and the problems that are developing because of that treatment. Specifically thinking about factory farming, bycatch. Those are some problems that not only affect the bodies being consumed, but also ultimately our nation and the globe.
And our health. Yeah. I think it's really important that we start to address this because I do think we are kind of getting to a tipping point where I feel like people are talking about it so much more. Maybe it's the power of social media.
Maybe it is.
Because you're really confronted on a daily basis with what is it that we're buying and what are we consuming. So what are some of the changes that you would love to see come out of students becoming more aware?
Well, what I do see at the end of every semester that I've taught this course is that students become more literate in terms of our food system so that they understand how complex it is, that there are a multitude of components, that it goes far beyond just the package that they purchase in the grocery store. And so that alone is extremely helpful. The fact that they become more aware about their own bodies and how they function to either reify or challenge our current food system is also really one of the great things that comes out of this course.
We find service learning classes can be so transformative, so I'm sure that it has a huge impact on students. I'm so delighted to be here in the beautiful USF Botanical Gardens with our former intern, Julia Pahalik. Hi. She spent a whole semester with us, even maybe a little bit longer, writing lots of great articles that we loved, where she did peer-to-peer conversations and interviewed students who were involved in various parts of experiential learning. But what I thought was so interesting when I met you was that you hadn't yet taken a traditional service learning class.
Yeah.
And now we found out when you came by and visited that you're actually in one right now.
Yeah, I was writing these pieces and I hadn't had any experience with it myself. So
Did it pique your interest when you were writing the articles?
It did, because I was interviewing these people and they were all telling me how helpful it was to them to have a hands-on experience that transcended just what they were learning in the classroom. So I thought to myself, well, I want to do this too. Maybe I can try to squeeze a class in before I graduate, and I did. It's ethics of food production, and I'm so happy I did, because it's really opened my eyes to a new level of learning.
It's so fantastic. Julia came by our office and started talking about her class, and I thought, well, we've got to interview you about this.
It was convenient.
Yeah,
for sure.
It really was. So we talk a lot about how service learning classes can be transformative for students. So can you talk about some of the changes that you felt? You already went into it with a strong interest, but what are some of the things that have come out of being in the class?
Well, my strong interest coming in was definitely about plant-based lifestyles and plant-based sustainability methods. So with that under my belt already, being a vegan myself, I just sought to understand more of what it was that I was already in. I wanted to make sure that I was making informed decisions at the market. Something that we focused on a lot is that you're voting with your dollar when you're in the grocery store. And you're really, whatever you're buying and whatever you're purchasing, you're saying, I approve of this and I support it. So I wanted to make sure that whatever we were learning here, I could apply it to my own life and the things that I purchased myself. So it's definitely taught me about what I should be buying, plant-based wise, and that there are ways to do things that are more sustainable than others.
I think there's this big irony of the people who are picking our fruits and vegetables who then ultimately can't necessarily afford to eat these really healthy foods, and some of those things I think they're probably important that came out of the class as well.
Right, absolutely. We learned about workers' rights, we learned about fair trade, we learned about everything pertaining to the food industry and what happens behind the scenes of the food industry that we might not be so exposed to in our day-to-day lives.
And I think we were talking about sort of how social media has really changed our view, because I think we are getting to more of a tipping point about what we're doing with our food, and then how food impacts so many aspects of our infrastructure and culturally and politically.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Food is something that is non-discriminatory. It affects all of us multiple times a day. So naturally you would assume that we would be making choices that are educated and informed and having the best effect not only on our personal bodies and our sociocultural values, but on those around us. So everything that we do food-wise affects someone or something else, whether that's a human, a worker, or the animal, or the people working in these factories. It's definitely political. There are lots of moving parts, but I think at its base we have to understand that what we're doing day to day ourselves, while it seems like a small act, is affecting things on a much grander scale.
Beautifully put. So that's one of the things that I love so much about service learning, is that it kind of makes activists. I mean, people really become awake to all of the issues by getting involved. And what was it about the service here at the Botanical Gardens that you think maybe added to the transformative aspects of the class?
Growing things at the Botanical Gardens has been such an experience for someone who, I am a vegan, but I had never grown food myself. I had never really looked into genetically modified growing methods, or sustainable ones at that. So learning about how to grow organic, that's something we touched on really hard in the class. It was really satisfying and a different kind of experience entirely to be so hands-on with the plants. Instead of going to the market and just picking up something so like sterilized and pre-packaged and plastic wrapped, we were eating it straight out of the ground. In our garden we grew kale and spinach and snow peas and some other things, but we picked our snow peas right out of the ground and ate them, and they were fresher and better than anything I've had previously. And it's just that, it's that level of it being hands-on is a chance to see from a first-hand perspective how it's different than other ways of acquiring that product.
Or even acquiring that knowledge. That's what I love about service learning, is you could have read about all the aspects of your own food production, but you actually did it.
Exactly. A textbook can only go so far, and it really, especially with this kind of class where we're talking about being out on the land, sort of a return to the land kind of concept, and you're growing things yourself, you really have to be there and see it to understand the full implications of what you're studying, I think. And I definitely saw it in my classmates too.
Well, once again, you have been so informational for students, with your peer-to-peer conversations, and then being able to tell everybody about your own experience in service learning. So I'm really happy that you came by our office to visit and told me all about your great experience in the class.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.